Alexander Reynolds stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his beachfront mansion's home office, absently adjusting his Italian silk tie while listening to the steady drone of financial projections. The morning sun cast golden reflections across the waves, creating a shimmer that usually helped him focus during these early video conferences. Today, however, something felt off, a subtle unease he couldn't quite place. As you can see from the quarterly forecast, Mr. Reynolds, droned Marcus Wheeler, the acquisition specialist, the Asian markets are showing promising indicators for our expansion plans. Alexander nodded, his steel-gray eyes scanning the financial charts on his dual monitors. At 42, he had built an empire that spanned 3 continents, earning him a reputation as one of the most shrewd businessmen in the industry. Everything in his life was meticulously controlled, from his investment portfolio to his daily schedule. The divorce had been the only disruption to his carefully constructed world, but even that had been handled with characteristic efficiency. The settlement was generous, more than generous really, ensuring his ex-wife Caroline and their daughter Emma maintained the lifestyle they were accustomed to. He made sure the monthly payments were substantial and always on time. In his mind, that was what responsible fathers did. His phone vibrated against his desk, displaying an unknown number. Alexander typically ignored such calls during meetings, but something, perhaps that same unease he'd been feeling all morning, made him reach for it. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said smoothly, muting his microphone. "I need to take this call." The moment he heard the small, trembling voice on the other end, his world tilted on its axis. "Daddy?" The whisper was so faint he almost missed it. "Daddy, I need help." "Emma?" Alexander's hand tightened around the phone. His 8-year-old daughter rarely called him, their communication usually limited to scheduled video chats on Sunday afternoons. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" "Mommy," Emma's voice cracked. "She fell down in the kitchen. She won't wake up." There was a pause, filled with the sound of quiet sniffling. I think it's because we haven't eaten in a while." The words hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean you haven't eaten? I send money every month." His mind raced through recent bank statements, each transfer confirmed and substantial. "I'm scared, Daddy," Emma continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Mommy said you were the only one who still cared, but I wasn't supposed to tell. Please don't be mad." Alexander was already moving, grabbing his keys and wallet with his free hand. "I'm not mad, sweetheart. Not at you. Never at you. Where are you right now?" "In my room, under the bed." The words came out in a rush. "Mom said to hide if anyone came to the door. She said we couldn't trust." The line went dead. Alexander stared at his phone in horror, his hands shaking as he dialed emergency services. As he rattled off Caroline's address to the dispatcher, his mind whirled with questions. How could this be happening? He'd done everything right. The payments, the arrangements, the legal agreements. He'd provided more than enough money for them to live comfortably. He barely remembered ending the call with emergency services or returning to his video conference long enough to excuse himself due to a family emergency. His entire focus was on getting to his daughter as quickly as possible. His personal assistant was already booking him on the next flight to Boston while he rushed to his car. The drive to the airport was a blur of frantic phone calls and mounting dread. Each unanswered call to Caroline's number increased his anxiety. The carefully constructed walls of his controlled world were crumbling, revealing a truth he had been too busy, or perhaps too willfully blind, to see. As his private jet took off, Alexander stared out the window at the receding coastline. The morning sun that had seemed so bright and promising just hours ago now felt like a harsh spotlight, illuminating his failures. He had always prided himself on being a provider, on fulfilling his responsibilities. But now, with Emma's frightened voice echoing in his mind, he was beginning to understand that maybe he had been measuring success with the wrong metrics all along. The apartment building stood in stark contrast to Alexander's memories. He remembered choosing this place himself. 3 years ago, a luxury complex in a safe neighborhood with a doorman and security cameras. Now, as he rushed through the lobby, he noticed the peeling wallpaper, the flickering fluorescent lights, and a distinct absence of the security features that had been so important in his decision. The elevator was out of order, forcing him to take the stairs to the 6th floor. Each step increased his sense of dread. He'd received a brief update from the emergency services. They had transported Caroline to the hospital, and a social worker was with Emma. But nothing had prepared him for what he found when he finally reached the apartment. The door was opened by a tired-looking woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Martinez from Child Protective Services. Behind her, Alexander could see into what had once been an elegantly furnished living room. Now the space was almost unrecognizable. The furniture was worn and broken, the walls showed water damage, and there was a pervasive smell of neglect. "Daddy!" Emma's cry cut through his shock. She ran to him, and he caught her in his arms, his heart breaking at how light she felt. Her clothes were too small and worn, her face thin and pale, but it was her eyes that truly shattered him. They held a wariness that no child should know. "Mr. Reynolds," Mrs. Martinez spoke quietly, "we need to discuss the situation. Your daughter appears to be suffering from malnutrition, and the living conditions here are concerning." Alexander held Emma tighter, feeling her small fingers clutch at his suit jacket. "I don't understand," he said, his voice rough. "I send support payments every month, more than enough for them to live comfortably. How could this happen?" Mrs. Martinez's expression was carefully neutral. "Financial abuse can take many forms, Mr. Reynolds. Sometimes what appears to be a stable situation from the outside can mask very complex problems." As Emma clung to him, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. "Marcus said we didn't deserve nice things. He said Mommy was stupid with money and needed him to take care of everything." "Marcus?" Alexander looked at Mrs. Martinez questioningly. "Caroline's partner for the past 8 months," she explained. "We're looking into his background now. Emma has mentioned some concerning behaviors." Alexander sat down heavily on a threadbare couch, still holding his daughter. The room spun with revelations: a boyfriend he hadn't known about, financial, manipulation he hadn't suspected, suffering he had failed to prevent. His daughter's next words drove the final nail into his carefully constructed illusions. "He made Mommy cry a lot," Emma continued, her voice small. "He said if she told anyone, especially you, he would make sure we never got any more money. Mommy was scared because he knew all about the bank stuff." The pieces were starting to fall into place: the gradual withdrawal from their usual communication channels, the increasing difficulty in reaching Caroline directly, the way Emma had seemed subdued during their video calls. He had attributed it all to them adjusting to their new life, to Caroline asserting her independence. How wrong he had been. Mrs. Martinez cleared her throat gently. "Mr. Reynolds, we'll need to conduct a formal investigation. Given the circumstances, we'd like to place Emma in your temporary custody, if you're willing and able to take her immediately." "Of course," he responded without hesitation. "But I need to see Caroline first. Which hospital?" "Massachusetts General," Mrs. Martinez replied. "But Mr. Reynolds, prepare yourself. The situation is quite serious." As Alexander made arrangements to take Emma with him, he noticed her trying to pack her few belongings into a tattered backpack. His heart clenched when he realized she was carefully wrapping a photo frame in her only sweater. It was a picture from happier times, showing the 3 of them at Emma's 5th birthday party. Looking around the apartment one last time, Alexander saw the truth that his money had hidden. The regular bank transfers that had eased his conscience had become a weapon in the hands of a manipulator. His distance, meant to give Caroline space to rebuild her life, had instead created a vacuum where abuse could flourish unseen. As they left the apartment, Emma held his hand tightly as if afraid he might disappear. In the car, she fell asleep almost immediately, exhaustion finally overtaking her. Alexander watched her through the rearview mirror, his mind already racing with plans. Not business strategies this time, but ways to heal the damage his negligence had allowed to happen. The fluorescent lights of Massachusetts General Hospital cast harsh shadows across Caroline's pale face. Alexander stood in the doorway of her hospital room, momentarily frozen by the sight of his ex-wife. The vibrant, confident woman he had known was barely recognizable in the frail figure before him. Emma had fallen asleep in the waiting room under the watchful eye of Mrs. Martinez, giving him this moment to face the reality of what had happened. "Mr. Reynolds," A doctor approached, clipboard in hand. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I've been overseeing your ex-wife's care." Alexander turned to face the doctor, forcing himself to focus. "How is she?" "Stable, but her condition is serious. She's suffering from severe malnutrition and dehydration. There are also signs of prolonged stress and anxiety." Dr. Chen's voice was professional but gentle. "Mr. Reynolds, has Mrs. Reynolds shown any previous signs of eating disorders or depression?" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, remembering Caroline's recently cancelled video calls, the way she'd stopped sharing photos of their daughter. I don't know. We've been divorced for 3 years. Our communication was mainly about Emma and finances." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. "We found evidence of prescription anxiety medication in her system, but no record of it being prescribed by her regular physician. We're concerned about where these medications came from and who was controlling their administration." The implications made Alexander's stomach turn. He thought about Emma's words about Marcus, about control and fear. "There was someone," he said slowly. "A boyfriend, Marcus. Emma mentioned he was controlling their finances." "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Chen's voice became more urgent, "we've seen cases like this before. Financial abuse often goes hand in hand with other forms of control. The medication we found can be used to make someone more compliant, more easily manipulated. Combined with malnutrition and isolation." A nurse interrupted, calling Dr. Chen away for an emergency. Alexander was left alone with his thoughts and the steady beeping of Caroline's monitors. He approached her bed slowly, noticing the bruises on her arms, not from violence but from malnutrition and vitamin deficiency, the doctor had explained. Caroline's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face. "Alex." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Emma, is she?" "She's safe," he assured her quickly, taking her hand. It felt like holding a bird's wing, fragile and cold. "She's sleeping in the waiting room. Caroline, why didn't you tell me?" Tears began sliding down her cheeks. "He said he would help me manage everything better. I was struggling with the bills, with decisions. He seemed so kind at first, so understanding." Her voice broke. "By the time I realized what was happening, he had access to everything. He said no one would believe me, that I'd look like an incompetent mother who couldn't handle her own finances." Alexander felt a surge of guilt and anger. "The money I sent? He convinced me to add him to my accounts, said he had investment experience, that he could help me build a better future for Emma." Caroline's words came faster now, as if a dam had broken. "He started small, questioning my purchases, suggesting I let him handle the bills. Then he said Emma and I were wasteful, that we didn't deserve nice things. He began limiting our food, saying we needed to learn discipline." Alexander listened, each word adding to the weight of his failure. He had been so focused on providing financially that he'd missed the signs of his family falling apart. Caroline continued, her voice growing weaker. "He isolated us slowly, said Emma's after-school activities were too expensive, convinced me. My friends were taking advantage of me. When I finally tried to stand up to him, She shuddered. "He threatened to tell social services I was an unfit mother. He had records of everything. Made it look like I'd been gambling, spending recklessly. I was trapped." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Martinez stood there, Emma holding her hand. The girl's eyes lit up at seeing her mother, awake, but she hesitated at the threshold, showing a caution that broke Alexander's heart. "Sweetheart," Caroline called softly. "It's okay. Come here." Emma approached slowly, climbing carefully onto the bed when Alexander helped her up. She curled up against her mother's side like a small cat, mindful of the IV lines and monitors. The sight of them together, both so fragile, both survivors of an invisible battle, crystallized something in Alexander's mind. He had always believed that success was measured in numbers, profit margins, stock prices, bank balances. But watching his daughter and ex-wife, he realized that the true measure of success was in the well-being of those you claim to care about. He had failed them once by mistaking financial support for actual care. He wouldn't make that mistake again. As Emma drifted off to sleep beside her mother, Caroline caught Alexander's eye. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have been stronger." "No," he replied firmly. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I thought throwing money at our problems was enough. I should have been more present, more aware." He squeezed her hand gently. "But that changes now. We're going to fix this, Caroline. All of it." Outside the hospital room window, the Boston skyline glittered in the gathering dusk. Alexander looked at the city lights, his mind already forming plans, but these weren't his usual business strategies. For the first time in years, he was thinking like a father and a protector first and a businessman second. The next morning, Alexander sat in his temporary office at the Boston branch of his company, surrounded by financial documents and bank statements. He had spent the night making calls, pulling strings, and setting things in motion. Emma was safe with a professional caregiver he trusted, allowing him to focus on unraveling the financial web that had entrapped Caroline. Mr. Reynolds, his assistant Janet, entered with another stack of papers. "The forensic accountant is here, and the private investigator sent over his preliminary report on Marcus Cooper." Alexander nodded, taking the folder she offered. The name Marcus Cooper had yielded surprising results. The man had a pattern, targeting vulnerable women, particularly those recently divorced with access to substantial financial resources. He operated just within the boundaries of legality, using emotional manipulation and financial coercion rather than outright theft. "The bank records are concerning, sir," Janet continued, her usual professional demeanor tinged with anger. "The pattern of withdrawals and transfers suggests a systematic draining of resources." He was careful, though. "Everything has Caroline's electronic signature or verbal authorization." Alexander spread the documents across his desk, his trained eye following the money trail. What he saw made his blood boil. The monthly support. Payments he'd sent had been immediately transferred to other accounts. Investments had been liquidated, and credit cards had been maxed out. But the real genius of the scheme was in its psychological architecture. "Look at this." He pointed to a series of transactions. He started by making small transfers, amounts Caroline wouldn't question, then gradually increased them while decreasing household spending. He was conditioning her, making her believe they couldn't afford basics while building his own nest egg. Janet leaned in to examine the records. "There's more, sir. The prescription medications Dr. Chen found in Caroline's system, they were purchased through an online pharmacy, using one of her credit cards. But the shipping address was a P.O. box registered to a company owned by Marcus Cooper." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture that made Alexander's professional admiration for the scheme's complexity war with his personal horror at its implications. Marcus Cooper had crafted a perfect trap, financial, emotional, and pharmaceutical, all while maintaining a facade of legitimate assistance. "Sir?" Janet's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "There's something else you should see." She handed him another document, this one from the private investigator. "Marcus Cooper isn't his real name, and he's done this before." Alexander scanned the report, his jaw tightening. 3 other women in the past 5 years, all with similar stories, all too ashamed or afraid to press charges, all left financially and emotionally devastated. The pattern was clear. He would enter their lives during vulnerable periods, establish trust, then gradually take control of their finances while isolating them from support systems. "Get me everything," Alexander ordered, standing up. "Bank records, credit card statements, property records. I want to know every account he's touched, every investment he's influenced, every dollar he's moved. And Janet, contact our legal team. All of them." As Janet hurried out, Alexander turned to the window, watching the morning traffic below. He had built his fortune by understanding patterns, by seeing the stories hidden in numbers. Now those same skills would serve a different purpose. His phone buzzed, a text from the caregiver. Emma was asking for him. The message included a photo of his daughter attempting to smile over a bowl of oatmeal, her first real breakfast in weeks. The sight steeled his resolve. Alexander Reynolds had always believed in the power of money. He had used it to build empires, to solve problems, to shape the world to his liking. But now he understood its darker potential, how it could become a chain, a weapon, a means of control. The revelation changed everything. He turned back to his desk, to the growing pile of evidence. In his mind, he could still see Caroline. In that hospital bed, Emma's cautious movements, the fear in both their eyes. The money trail before him told a story of systematic abuse, of power wielded with surgical precision. But it also provided a path forward. "Janet," he called, and his assistant reappeared instantly. "Schedule a meeting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit and find me every caseworker, counselor, and advocate who's dealt with similar situations. We're not just going to stop him. We're going to make sure he never does this to anyone else." As Janet nodded and left, Alexander began organizing the documents. He had always excelled at turning complex financial data into compelling narratives for boardrooms and investors. Now he would use that skill to tell a different kind of story, one of manipulation, control, and the invisible wounds that money could both inflict and heal. The pediatric psychologist's office was painted in soft, calming colors, with child-sized furniture scattered throughout. Alexander sat in an adult chair that seemed comically small, watching Emma work with Dr. Sarah Winters. His daughter was drawing at a small table, her crayon moving across the paper with deliberate strokes. "Emma's been very brave," Dr. Winters said quietly, observing the child. "But she's carrying a lot of anxiety and fear. Children in these situations often blame themselves." Alexander watched as Emma carefully selected another crayon. She had insisted on wearing one of the new outfits he'd bought her, a purple dress with matching shoes. The old Emma would have twirled in it, showing it off. This Emma had simply hugged it close, as if afraid it might disappear. "The thing about emotional abuse," Dr. Winters continued, "is that it doesn't leave visible marks." Emma witnessed the gradual erosion of her mother's confidence, the slow transformation of their home from a safe space to a place of constant tension. That kind of experience changes how a child sees the world. Emma's drawing was taking shape. A house with dark windows, a small figure hiding behind a tree. Alexander's chest tightened at the imagery. "She keeps asking if she did something wrong," he admitted, his voice rough. "If that's why they didn't have food, why her mother was always crying. I tell her it's not her fault, but she lived in an environment where everything was presented as someone's fault," Dr. Winters finished. "Where basic necessities were framed as privileges that had to be earned. It will take time to help her understand that love and care shouldn't come with conditions." Emma looked up then, catching her father's eye. She gave him a small smile, tentative, but real. It was more than he'd seen from her in days. "Daddy," she called softly, "can you come see my picture?" Alexander moved to the small table, kneeling beside her chair. The drawing showed more details now. The dark house, the hiding child, but also a larger figure approaching from the side, carrying what looked like a bright light. "That's you," Emma explained, pointing to the figure with the light. "Coming to find us." The simplicity of her statement hit him harder than any business crisis ever had. He had always thought of himself as a provider, measuring his worth as a father in dollar signs and investment portfolios. But to Emma, his true value lay in simply being there, in coming to find them when they were lost. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Winters spoke from her chair, "Emma's healing will depend greatly on stability and consistent support. She needs to know that the safety she feels now isn't temporary." Alexander nodded, still looking at the drawing. "I'm renting an apartment near here," he said. "My company can be run from Boston as easily as from California. Emma needs both her parents right now, and they need time to heal." Dr. Winters smiled approvingly. "That's excellent. Children are remarkably resilient when they have proper support. Emma's already showing signs of feeling more secure." As if to prove the point, Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, continuing to color. The gesture was small, but significant. Physical contact had been rare since he'd found her in that apartment. "There's something else," Alexander said, keeping his voice low. "I'm starting a foundation for women and children in similar situations. The police said Marcus had done this before. that there were others who never came forward because they were too ashamed, too afraid of losing their children. Dr. Winters leaned forward, interested. Financial abuse is drastically underreported. Victims often don't realize what's happening until they're trapped, and even then, many don't recognize it as abuse because there are no physical marks. I want to change. That? Alexander replied, absently stroking Emma's hair as she drew. Education, support services, legal aid, a safety net for people trying to rebuild their lives. I understand money now, not just how to make it, but how it can be used as a weapon. I want to help people defend themselves. Emma had started. A new drawing, this one brighter. The house had lights in its windows now, and the figures were standing in sunlight rather than hiding in shadows. The foundation will need expert advisors, Dr. Winters noted. People who understand the psychological aspects as well as the financial ones. That's why I'm talking to you. Alexander smiled slightly. You have experience with the children caught in these situations. Would you consider joining our advisory board? Before Dr. Winters could respond, Emma tugged at her father's sleeve. Can I help too? She asked. With the foundation. I want to help other kids who are scared like I was. Alexander felt tears prick at his eyes. His daughter, who had endured so much, was already thinking about helping others. Of course you can, sweetheart. In fact, I think you might be our most important advisor of all. Emma beamed, her first full smile since the day he'd found her. She turned back to her drawing with renewed energy, adding more details to the sunny scene. Dr. Winters watched them together, noting the natural way Emma now leaned into her father's presence, how she no longer flinched at sudden movements or loud noises. Mr. Reynolds, she said softly, I believe you've already done the most important thing. You've shown Emma that help can come when you ask for it, that adults can be trusted to protect rather than control. Caroline's recovery room at the rehabilitation center overlooked a small garden where patients could sit and enjoy the fresh air. Alexander found her there one afternoon, wrapped in a warm blanket despite the mild spring weather. Her physical strength was returning slowly, but the emotional healing would take longer. The doctors say I can leave next week, she said as he sat beside her. They've helped me understand so much about what happened, about how I let things get so bad. You didn't let anything happen, Alexander corrected gently. You were targeted by someone who knew exactly how to manipulate and control. The investigators found 3 other women he'd done this to. Caroline's hands tightened on her blanket. I keep thinking about Emma. How could I let her go hungry? What kind of mother? Stop, Alexander interrupted. Emma is safe now. She's in therapy. She's healing, and she needs her mother to heal, too. No more blame, remember? That's what Dr. Phillips keeps telling you. His small smile touched Caroline's lips. You've been talking to my therapist? I've been talking to everyone, he admitted. Therapists, counselors, financial abuse experts. I'm learning so much about what you both went through, about how I could have been more present, more aware. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a butterfly dance among the garden flowers. It was a strange kind of peace they'd found, not the polite distance of their early divorce, but something more honest, built on shared concern for their daughter and mutual understanding of their past mistakes. I saw the paperwork for your foundation, Caroline said finally. Emma couldn't stop talking about it during her visit yesterday. She says she's going to be your special advisor. Alexander chuckled. She's already given me several suggestions. Did you know she wants to start a program where kids can teach other kids about money? She says if she had understood more about how money worked, she might have realized something was wrong sooner. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. She's so strong, stronger than I was. She gets that from you, Alexander said firmly. You protected her the best you could. You taught her to be resourceful. She knew to hide that old phone, to call. She ever helped when things got bad? That's not weakness, Caroline, that's survival. A nurse appeared at the garden door, signaling that it was time for Caroline's therapy session. As Alexander helped her up from the bench, she caught his arm. The foundation, she said hesitantly. When I'm stronger, I'd like to help. Maybe share my story. If it could help other women recognize the signs before things get as bad as they did for me. Alexander felt a surge of pride and admiration for his ex-wife. Even after everything she'd been through, her instinct was to help others. The foundation would be honored to have you involved, Caroline, but only when you're ready, and only in ways that feel safe for you. As they walked back to the building, Caroline leaned slightly on his arm. Not from physical weakness this time, but in a gesture of trust that meant more than words could express. "Alex," she said as they reached her room, "thank you. Not just for the foundation or the therapy or," she gestured around at the private rehabilitation center, "for seeing me, the real me, not just the problems that needed fixing." Alexander thought about the man he'd been just weeks ago, measuring his success in spreadsheets and stock prices. "I'm learning to see a lot of things differently now," he replied. Later that evening, as he drove to pick up Emma from her art therapy class, Alexander reflected on how much had changed. His phone still buzzed with business calls and emails, but they no longer seemed as urgent as they once had. Instead, his mind was filled with plans for the foundation, with Emma's recovery milestones, with Caroline's growing strength. He had spent years building walls of wealth around his life, thinking they would protect everyone he cared about. Now he was learning to build bridges instead, between himself and his daughter, between past mistakes and future possibilities, between those who needed help and those who could provide it. The conference room of Alexander's Boston office buzzed with an energy different from his usual business meetings. Instead of shareholders and executives, the table was surrounded by social workers, therapists, financial advisors, and survivors of financial abuse. It was the first official planning meeting for the Reynolds Family Protection Foundation. "The statistics are staggering," Sharon Martinez, the social worker who had first helped Emma, was saying. "Financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases, but it's the least discussed form of control. People don't recognize it until they're trapped." Alexander stood at the head of the table, his usual power suits replaced by more casual attire, a change suggested by Emma, who said his business clothes might intimidate people seeking help. "That's exactly why education needs to be our first priority," he said. "Not just for potential victims, but for everyone who might be in a position to notice the warning signs." Dr. Winters, who had agreed to head the Foundation's psychological support programs, nodded in agreement. "The patterns are often subtle. Control disguised as concern, isolation presented as protection. We need to help people understand that financial abuse isn't just about stealing money. It's about using money to steal someone's autonomy." The meeting continued with ideas flowing freely. A legal aid program for victims, financial literacy workshops for women leaving difficult relationships, support groups for children who had witnessed abuse. Each suggestion was noted, evaluated, and incorporated into the growing framework of the Foundation's mission. As Alexander listened, he found his attention drawn to a quiet figure at the end of the table. Jessica Chen had been one of Marcus Cooper's previous victims, convinced to come forward after hearing about Caroline's case. Her presence today was a testament to her courage and a reminder of why this work was so crucial. "Ms. Chen," Alexander said gently during a break in the discussion, "you haven't shared your thoughts yet. As someone who's lived through this, your insight would be invaluable." Jessica looked up, surprised at being addressed directly. She clutched her coffee cup like a shield before speaking. I was thinking about prevention," she said softly. "About how to reach people before they're vulnerable. Schools, community, centers, divorce support groups, places where people might be more receptive to learning about financial safety." "That's brilliant," Sharon exclaimed. "Preventive education in spaces where people already feel safe and supported. It would remove the stigma of seeking help." The discussion sparked to life again, with Jessica's suggestion serving as a catalyst for new ideas. Alexander watched as she gradually became more engaged, her initial hesitance giving way to passionate advocacy. It was a transformation he had seen in Caroline during her recovery, survivors reclaiming their voice, their confidence, their power. A knock at the conference room door interrupted the brainstorming. Emma stood there, having just finished her after-school art therapy session. Her eyes widened at the sight of so many people, but she didn't retreat as she might have done weeks ago. "Come in, sweetheart," Alexander called. "We're just finishing up our first foundation meeting. Would you like to share any ideas?" Emma approached the table, clutching her art folder. After a moment's hesitation, she opened it and pulled out a drawing. "I made this," she said, her voice small but steady. "It's about how it feels when you're scared, but can't tell anyone why." The room fell silent as the drawing was passed around. It showed a maze of dark corridors with tiny windows of light, a child's representation of hope in darkness. Hamsabi. Impact was profound, especially on the professionals who worked with abuse survivors. "Emma," Dr. Winters said gently, "would you be willing to let us use this in our materials? Sometimes art can express what words can't." Emma looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," she agreed, "but I want to make more, different ones, to show how it feels to be afraid, and then how it feels to be safe again." Jessica Chen wiped tears from her eyes. "That's perfect," she said, "because people need to see both, the darkness and the light at the end, the hope that things can get better." Alexander watched as his daughter began explaining her ideas for more drawings, her natural shyness forgotten in her enthusiasm. To help, she had transformed from a victim of circumstances to an active participant in healing, not just her own but potentially many others. The meeting concluded with concrete plans and assignments, but more importantly with a sense of purpose that transcended professional obligations. As the participants gathered their materials, Alexander overheard snippets of conversation that confirmed they were on the right path. "We could adapt these programs for different communities. My colleague in domestic violence services would be perfect for... I know several attorneys who would volunteer their time." Emma tugged at his sleeve as the last participants left. "Daddy, do you think we'll really help people?" Alexander looked at his daughter, seeing in her eyes the same mix of hope and determination he'd witnessed around the conference table. "Yes, sweetheart," he replied. "I think we're going to help a lot of people find their way back to the light." The small cafe near Emma's school had become their special place for father-daughter conversations. Alexander watched as she carefully arranged her cookies on the plate, a ritual that spoke of control regained, of simple pleasures rediscovered. 3 months had passed since that desperate phone call, and while healing wasn't linear, the changes were undeniable. "Mom looked pretty at the foundation meeting yesterday," Emma said, breaking a cookie into precise quarters. Her smile was real, like before. Alexander nodded, remembering Caroline's first public appearance as a foundation spokesperson. She had spoken to a room full of social workers and counselors, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger as she shared. Her story, "Your mother is very brave," he replied. "Just like you." Emma considered this, popping a cookie quarter into her mouth. "Dr. Winters says being brave doesn't mean you can't be scared sometimes. She says it's okay to have bad days, as long as you remember the good days are real too." The wisdom in his daughter's words struck Alexander deeply. He had spent so many years viewing problems as things to be solved with money or power, never understanding that healing required something different: time, patience, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. "Ms. Chen called Mom yesterday," Emma continued, moving on to the next cookie. "They're starting a support group together for other mums who are scared like Mom was. Did you know Ms. Chen has a daughter too? She's going to be in my art therapy class next week." Alexander smiled, remembering how reluctant Jessica Chen had been at that first foundation meeting. Now, she was one of their most active volunteers, her own healing intertwined with her desire to help others. "So that's wonderful, sweetheart. How do you feel about having a new friend in your class?" Emma's face turned serious. "I'm going to help her feel safe," she declared, "like how everyone helped us feel safe again. Dr. Winters says sometimes the best way to heal is to help other people heal too." A commotion at the cafe's entrance drew their attention. A young woman had entered, struggling with a baby carrier while trying to manage a toddler's tantrum. The stress and embarrassment on her face were painfully familiar. Alexander had seen that same look on Caroline's face in old photographs during the early days of Marcus's manipulation. Without hesitation, Emma slid from her chair and approached the woman. "Would you like to share our table?" she asked, her voice clear and confident. "It's quieter in our corner and I have extra cookies." The woman looked startled, then grateful. Alexander stood, helping her with the baby carrier while Emma led the toddler to their table, already chatting about the cafe's selection of juice boxes. As they settled in, the woman introduced herself as Sarah, her voice carrying the slight tremor of someone unused to kindness from strangers. The toddler, calmer now, leaned against his mother while accepting a cookie from Emma. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, bouncing the fussing baby. "We don't usually. I don't often take them out alone, but sometimes you need to remind yourself you can," Alexander finished gently, recognizing the signs of someone beginning to reclaim their independence. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, then filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, "exactly that." Emma, with the instincts of someone who had walked a similar path, began entertaining the toddler with stories about the drawings on the cafe walls, giving the adults space to talk. "We have a foundation," Alexander said quietly, sliding one of the foundation's cards across the table. "Support, groups, counseling, legal aid if needed. No pressure, no judgments, just people who understand that sometimes strength needs a little backup." Sarah stared at the card for a long moment, then slipped it into her pocket. She didn't say anything else about it, but the tension in her shoulders eased slightly. They spent the next hour sharing cookies and conversation, Emma's natural warmth drawing smiles from both children while their mother gradually relaxed. When Sarah finally gathered her things to leave, she seemed to stand a little straighter. "That was good," Emma declared after they'd said goodbye. "She looked scared at first, like Mom used to, but then she didn't anymore." Alexander watched through the window as Sarah buckled her children into her car, her movements more confident than when she'd arrived. "You helped with that, sweetheart. You knew exactly what she needed." Emma shrugged, but her eyes shone with quiet pride. "Everyone needs a safe place sometimes, like this cafe is ours." She paused, then added, "Maybe she'll come to Mom's support group. Then her kids can come to art therapy too." "Maybe they will," Alexander agreed, marveling at how his daughter had transformed her own trauma into compassion. She had become a bridge for others, just as others had been bridges for her. The news of Alexander Reynolds' dramatic career shift had finally reached the business world. The Wall Street Journal's headline read, "Tech mogul shifts focus to combat financial abuse." As he sat in his Boston office, scanning the article, his phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from other CEOs, investors, and media outlets. "Mr. Reynolds?" His assistant Janet appeared at the door. "The board members are waiting in the conference room. They've called an emergency meeting about the foundation." Alexander had been expecting this. His decision to redirect a significant portion of his time and resources to the Reynolds Family Protection Foundation had caused ripples throughout his corporate empire. Some board members were concerned about the impact on shareholder value. Others worried about the company's image being associated with such a sensitive issue. "Thank you, Janet," he said, straightening his tie. "Is everything else prepared?" She nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. Over the past weeks, they had meticulously documented the foundation's impact. Numbers of families helped, success stories, and most importantly, the growing network of support that was forming around their initiative. The conference room fell silent as Alexander entered. The faces around the table were familiar. Men and women he'd worked with for years, people who had helped build his company into what it was today. But now they looked at him with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Alex," Marcus Wellington, the lead board member, began. "We've reviewed the quarterly reports. The foundation's budget has tripled in the past month alone. The company's focus appears to be shifting. Shareholders are expressing concern." Alexander remained standing, his posture relaxed but confident. "Before we discuss numbers, I'd like you to meet someone." He pressed a button on the conference phone. "Caroline, are you there?" His ex-wife's voice filled the room, clear and strong. "Yes, Alex, we're all here." "All?" Wellington's eyebrows rose. "I'm in our Boston support center," Caroline explained. "With me are 37 women and their children. They're all survivors of financial abuse, all rebuilding their lives with help from the foundation. Would you like to hear their stories?" For the next hour, the boardroom was silent, except for the voices coming through the speaker. Women from all walks of life shared their experiences. A surgeon whose brilliant career had been nearly destroyed, a teacher who had lost her retirement savings, a young entrepreneur whose startup had been stolen from her. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same: systematic manipulation, isolation and control through financial means. "These women aren't just survivors," Caroline concluded. "They're now part of our prevention network. They're helping us identify warning signs, create educational programs, and reach others who are still trapped. And for every woman in this room, there are hundreds more waiting for help." Alexander watched his board members' faces, seeing the impact of these personal testimonies. "Now," he said quietly, "let's talk about numbers." He pulled up a presentation on the screen. "Our foundation's work has attracted partners we never expected. 3 major banks have approached us about implementing early warning systems for financial abuse. 2 tech companies want to develop apps for financial safety education. 5 law firms have offered pro bono services." Wellington leaned forward, his business instincts engaged. "You're creating a new market sector." "I'm addressing a need. That's always existed," Alexander corrected. "But yes, in doing so, we're opening up new opportunities. The foundation isn't just about helping victims, it's about changing how society views and handles financial relationships." Another board member, Sarah Chen, no relation to Jessica, spoke up. "The publicity has been overwhelmingly positive. Our company's reputation for social responsibility has skyrocketed. Several major institutional investors have actually increased their holdings because of this initiative. But it's more than that," Alexander continued. "Every person we help becomes part of a growing network. They refer their friends, family members, colleagues. They become advocates in their communities. The foundation isn't just growing, it's creating a movement." He pulled up another slide, showing the foundation's educational outreach programs. "We're working with schools to teach financial literacy. We're partnering with divorce attorneys to provide preventive education. We're developing corporate training programs to help HR departments recognize signs of financial abuse among employees." The room was silent as the board members absorbed this information. Finally, Wellington spoke again. "You've thought this through more thoroughly than we realized. This isn't just a charitable endeavor. It's a comprehensive approach to a systemic problem. One that affects our employees, our customers, and our communities," Alexander added. "By addressing it, we're not just doing good, we're demonstrating leadership in an area that's been ignored for too long." A younger board member raised her hand. "My sister, she went through something similar last year. Nobody understood what was happening until it was almost too late. If something like this foundation had existed, then..." The mood in the room shifted. Personal connections to the issue began emerging. One board member had a niece who'd lost everything to a manipulative partner. Another remembered a colleague who'd disappeared from the corporate world after a suspicious relationship. "I'm not asking the board to choose between profit and purpose," Alexander concluded. "I'm showing you how we can achieve both. The foundation isn't a distraction from our business, it's an evolution of it." When the meeting ended 2 hours later, the board had not only approved the foundation's expanded budget, but had also committed personal resources to its growth. As Alexander watched them leave, he received a text from Caroline. "The women here want to know when they can share their stories with other companies. They're ready to help expand the movement." So, smiled, typing back a response. "Tell them to rest and heal first. The movement isn't going anywhere. It's just getting started." The autumn leaves danced around Emma's feet as she walked through the park with her parents. It was their new Sunday tradition, a simple family outing that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Caroline looked healthier now, her steps confident, her smile genuine. Alexander had learned to leave his phone on silent during these precious hours, understanding that true wealth couldn't be measured in missed calls. "Look," Emma pointed excitedly to a community bulletin board. Among the local notices and advertisements was a familiar poster, one she had helped design for the foundation. The artwork was hers, a series of butterflies emerging from a dark cocoon, symbolizing transformation and hope. "They're everywhere now," Caroline said proudly. "The posters, the helpline numbers. I saw them in my yoga studio yesterday. Someone had added post-it notes with encouraging messages." Alexander watched as Emma ran ahead to inspect the bulletin board more closely. "The volunteer network has grown faster than we expected," he said. "Janet says we've had to open 3 new training centers just to keep up with demand." Caroline nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just the official programs either. Women are creating their own support groups, starting informal networks. Sarah, you remember from the cafe, she's organized a weekly meeting for mothers at her children's school. They discuss finances, share resources, watch out for each other." They reached a park bench, their usual resting spot. Emma was now engaged in an intense conversation with another little girl near the playground, their heads bent together over what looked like a friendship bracelet. "Dr. Winters says Emma's progress has been remarkable," Caroline said softly. "She's using her experience to help other children feel less alone. Yesterday, she gave a new girl at her therapy group one of her special drawings, the one about finding light in dark places." Alexander felt a familiar mix of pride and pain. "She's inherited your strength," he said. "Both of you, the way you've transformed your pain into purpose. It's humbling." "We had help," Caroline reminded him. "The foundation, the support networks, the professionals. But most importantly, we had someone who believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's return, her face flushed with excitement. "That girl," she said, pointing to her new friend. "Her mom is in one of our support groups. She recognized me from the art therapy class. Can she come over sometime? She likes drawing too." Before either parent could respond, a woman approached, presumably the other girl's mother. Her face bore the gentle signs of someone in recovery, cautious hope mixed with newfound strength. "I'm Rebecca," she introduced herself. "I've been meaning to thank you, both of you. The Foundation's programs, they gave me the courage to leave a bad situation, to show my daughter that we deserve better." Emma and her new friend had already returned to the playground, their laughter carrying across the autumn air. Rebecca watched them for a moment before continuing. "It's not just the practical help, though that's been invaluable. It's knowing we're not alone, seeing successful women like Caroline speaking out, watching children like Emma thriving. It gives us hope, real, tangible hope." As they talked, Alexander noticed other people in the park, a woman reading a book, bearing the Foundation's logo, 2 friends having what appeared to be an intense discussion near a bulletin board with their poster, a young mother carefully tucking one of their information cards into her purse. The Foundation's impact was becoming visible in these small everyday moments. It wasn't just about the grand gestures or official programs. It was about changing the conversation, one person at a time. "We're having a community gathering next weekend," Caroline told Rebecca. "Very informal, just families sharing a meal, children playing together. Would you and your daughter like to join us?" Rebecca's eyes lit up. "We'd love to. My daughter, she needs to see more families like ours, families that have healed." As Rebecca left to collect her daughter, Emma came running back. "Can we get ice cream?" she asked, her voice carrying none of the hesitation that had marked similar requests months ago. "I want to show Sarah's special sundae to my new friend." Alexander and Caroline exchanged glances, sharing a moment of quiet joy at their daughter's growing confidence. "Of course," Caroline said. "I think we could all use some ice cream." Walking toward the park's small ice cream stand, Alexander reflected on how much had changed. His life was fuller now, richer in ways that had nothing to do with his bank account. The Foundation was growing, yes, but more importantly, it was sparking countless small transformations in parks, in schools, in quiet conversations between friends. Emma skipped ahead, her butterfly-decorated backpack bouncing with each step. She was no longer the frightened child who had made that desperate phone call. She was becoming a beacon of hope for other children, just as Caroline had become one for other women. And Alexander? He had learned that true success wasn't measured in quarterly reports or stock prices. It was measured in moments like these, in Sunday walks, in shared ice cream, in the growing network of people helping each other find their way back to light. The Foundation's main office buzzed with activity on a crisp Monday morning. Alexander sat in his new office, deliberately designed to be welcoming rather than imposing, reviewing the latest reports with Janet. The walls were adorned with Emma's artwork and success stories from their programs, a constant reminder of why they had started this journey. "The numbers are impressive," Janet said, highlighting key statistics. "Our prevention programs have reached over 10,000 people in the past 6 months. The Emergency Assistance Fund has helped 300 families establish financial independence. But here's what's really interesting: the ripple effect." She pulled up a map showing dots of light spreading across the country. Each point represents someone who's gone through our program and then started their own initiative. Support groups, mentoring programs, community workshops. They're creating their own networks of protection. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caroline stood there, looking professional in a business suit, but with a warmth that her previous corporate career had never allowed her to show. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's someone you both need to meet." She stepped aside to reveal a woman in her early 60s, elegantly dressed, but with hands that twisted nervously in front of her. "This is Margaret Wellington, Marcus's mother." Alexander felt his body tense instinctively. The name brought back memories of dark apartments and empty refrigerators, of Emma's frightened voice on the phone. Janet moved protectively closer to her. "Desk. Please," Margaret said quickly, her voice trembling. "I know what my son did. That's why I'm here." Caroline touched Alexander's arm gently. "Listen to her story. It's important." Margaret sat in one of the comfortable chairs they kept for clients, her perfect posture at odds with her obvious distress. "I've spent months trying to find the courage to come here. When I read about what Marcus did to your family, to those other women, I realized I had to speak up." She pulled an old photograph from her purse, a family portrait showing a younger Margaret with a man whose smile didn't reach his eyes. "My husband, Marcus's father, was like him. Charming in public, controlling at home. He managed every penny, monitored every purchase. I couldn't buy groceries without showing him receipts. Couldn't get a job because he said it would reflect poorly on him." Alexander felt his anger softening into understanding. "You raised Marcus in that environment?" Margaret nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I thought I was protecting him by staying, by maintaining the perfect family image. Instead, I taught him that love means control, that power comes from making others dependent. I helped create the man who hurt your family." She pulled out more documents, bank statements, property records, investment portfolios. "This is everything I have. My husband passed years ago, but I've kept tracking Marcus's financial movements. I have records going back 15 years, patterns of accounts he's used, properties he's hidden money in. I want to help you stop him and help prevent other mothers from making my mistakes." Janet was already examining the documents, her experienced eye-catching details that could help their legal team, but Alexander was more interested in Margaret's determination to break the cycle. "What made you decide to come forward now?" he asked. "Your daughter's artwork," Margaret replied, gesturing to the butterflies on the wall. "I saw it in a magazine article about the Foundation. The way she shows the transformation from darkness to light, it made me realize that change is possible, even after decades of silence." Caroline, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "We've been developing a program for families, helping parents recognize how financial behaviors affect their children's understanding of relationships. Would you be willing to share your perspective?" Margaret straightened in her chair, a glimmer of purpose replacing her nervousness. "I would. My story. It's not just about Marcus. It's about generational patterns that need to be broken." As they discussed possibilities, Emma burst into the office fresh from her after-school art program. She stopped short at seeing the unfamiliar visitor, but something in Margaret's sad smile must have touched her, because she approached slowly. "I like your necklace," Emma said, pointing to the butterfly pendant Margaret wore. "It matches my drawings." "I bought it after I saw your artwork," Margaret admitted, "to remind myself that it's never too late to spread your wings." Emma studied her with the direct gaze of a child who had learned to trust her instincts. "Are you going to help other people like we do?" "I'm going to try," Margaret replied. "I need to help fix something that went wrong a long time ago." Emma nodded sagely. "Dr. Winters says fixing things takes time, but every day you try makes you stronger." The simple wisdom of her words brought fresh tears to Margaret's eyes. Alexander watched as his daughter, without hesitation, pulled a fresh drawing from her backpack and offered it to the older woman. "This is my newest one," Emma explained. "It's about how helping others helps you heal too. You can keep it if you want." Margaret accepted the drawing with trembling hands. The image showed a chain of people holding lanterns, each light illuminating the path for those behind them. "Out of the darkest stories come the brightest determination to change," Caroline said softly. "We've seen it in our support groups, in our volunteer network, and now, Alexander finished, we're seeing how the cycle of harm can be transformed into a cycle of healing." The school auditorium was packed for the annual talent show, but this year was different. Instead of just songs and dances, the students had chosen to showcase projects that made a difference in their community. Emma stood backstage, nervously, adjusting her presentation cards, while her parents offered quiet encouragement. "Remember, sweetheart," Caroline whispered, "just speak from your heart like we practiced." Emma nodded, clutching the large portfolio that contained her artwork. Over the past year, her therapeutic drawings had evolved into something more, a visual language for children to express their feelings about family, safety, and self-worth. "Next up," the principal announced, Emma Reynolds and her friends presenting the Light Keepers Project. Emma walked onto the stage, followed by 5 other children, all from families who had been helped by the foundation. Among them was Sarah's daughter Lisa, Rebecca's daughter Maya, and Jessica Chen's daughter Angela. Each child carried a piece of artwork they had created together. "Sometimes," Emma began, her voice clear and strong, "bad things happen because people don't know how to ask for help. Sometimes grown-ups get scared and forget that they're not alone." She unfolded the first piece of artwork, a collaborative mural showing a community of people holding hands. "We started the Light Keepers Project because we wanted other kids to know it's okay to speak up," Lisa continued. "When my mum and I were scared, Emma showed me how to draw my feelings. It helped me feel less alone." One by one, the children shared their stories through art and words. They explained how they had started visiting other schools, teaching other children about safe relationships and the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. "We have art classes every Saturday now," Maya explained, pointing to their latest project. "Kids come and learn to draw their feelings. Sometimes their parents join too. We call it drawing together because that's what we do. We draw together, heal together, and grow together." In the audience, Alexander noticed several of their foundation's success stories, women who had rebuilt their lives and were now helping others do the same. Sarah sat with her toddler in her lap, beaming as Lisa described their new life. Rebecca was filming the presentation for their foundation's educational program. Even Margaret Wellington was there, her butterfly necklace catching the stage lights. The children's final piece was a massive collage made up of hundreds of smaller drawings. "Every picture here was made by someone who found their voice," Emma explained. "Some are from kids like us. Some are from grown-ups who learned it's never too late to start over. Together, they tell a story of hope." As the audience applauded, Alexander felt Caroline's hand slip into his. "She's amazing," Caroline whispered. "They all are. Do you remember how scared she was to talk to anyone a year ago?" Alexander remembered all too well. The frightened little girl hiding under her bed, the whispered phone call that had changed everything. Now he watched as his daughter confidently answered questions from the audience, explaining how art could help people express feelings they couldn't put into words. After the presentation, Families gathered in the school cafeteria for refreshments. Emma and her friends had set up a small art station where they were teaching other children their drawing techniques. Parents hovered nearby, picking up foundation brochures and talking quietly with Caroline about the programs available. "Mr. Reynolds?" A teacher approached, holding one of Emma's original drawings, the one about finding light in dark places. "We've been using copies of this in our counseling office. It's helping children open up about their home situations. Would your foundation consider developing a full curriculum around this concept?" Before Alexander could respond, Emma called out excitedly, "Daddy, come see. Lisa's teaching everyone how to draw butterflies coming out of cocoons. She says it's a metaphor, Lisa supplied proudly. For transformation. That's what Dr. Winters taught us." Alexander joined the children at their art table, watching as they guided others through their healing process. Emma had laid out her special markers, the ones she used to add touches of gold to her darkness to light drawings. "Everyone gets to add a little light," she explained to a shy boy who had joined them, "because everyone has light inside them. Sometimes they just need help finding it again." Watching these children, who had experienced things no child should, now leading others toward healing, Alexander understood that this was true success. Not the millions in his bank account, or the corporate empire he had built, but this, the transformation of pain into purpose, of fear into hope, of darkness into light. The Lightkeepers project was just beginning, but its impact was already rippling outward, touching lives in ways he never could have imagined when he first answered that desperate phone call. Emma and her friends had taken their experiences and turned them into beacons of hope for others, proving that even the youngest among us could be powerful agents of change. The Foundation's first annual gala was unlike any charity event Alexander had ever attended. Instead of the usual corporate formality, the atmosphere in the transformed community center buzzed with genuine warmth and purpose. Art from the light. Keepers Project decorated the walls, telling stories of transformation through children's eyes. Caroline, elegant in a simple blue dress, stood at the podium addressing the gathered crowd. Her voice, once silenced by fear, now carried authority and compassion. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine standing here. I couldn't imagine being strong enough to share my story. But strength, I've learned, isn't about being unbreakable. It's about having the courage to piece yourself back together." The audience included an unlikely mix of survivors, business leaders, social workers, and community advocates. In one corner, Margaret Wellington chatted with a group of mothers from the support program. Her testimony against her son had helped build a stronger case, leading to legal reforms in how financial abuse was prosecuted. "Financial abuse thrives in silence," Caroline continued. "It grows in the spaces between what we show the world and what we live behind closed doors. Our foundation isn't just about providing resources, it's about breaking that silence, about creating communities where asking for help is seen as an act of strength, not shame." Emma sat in the front row with her friends from the Lightkeepers project, all dressed up for the occasion. They had spent weeks preparing a special presentation, a digital gallery of their artwork, combined with stories from the families they'd helped. Janet approached Alexander, tablet in hand. "The online donations are flooding in," she whispered. "The live stream has gone viral. People are sharing their own stories in the comments, offering to start chapters in their cities." Alexander nodded, but his attention was on Caroline as she introduced the next speaker, Sarah, the young mother they'd met in the cafe months ago. Sarah stood at the podium, her children watching proudly from their seats. "When I walked into that cafe last year," Sarah began, "I was running on empty, not just my wallet but my spirit. A stranger's kindness, a little girl offering cookies and a father offering hope, changed everything." She smiled at Emma, who beamed back. "Today I run 2 support groups and a job training program for women rebuilding their lives. Because kindness, like cruelty, creates ripples. But kindness's ripples build bridges, while cruelties build walls." The presentation screen behind her lit up with statistics. Hundreds of families helped, dozens of community programs established, partnerships with banks and businesses to create early warning systems for financial abuse. But it was the personal, stories that held everyone's attention, tales of mothers and children finding their way back to joy, of communities coming together to protect their vulnerable members. Rebecca's daughter Maya took the stage next, introducing the Lightkeepers Project's newest initiative, a peer support program for children in schools. "We know what it's like to feel scared and alone," she explained with remarkable poise, "so we created something we wish we'd had, a way for kids to help other kids feel safe and strong." As Maya spoke, Alexander noticed movement at the back of the room. A group of teenagers had arrived, students from a local high school who had started their own anti-abuse advocacy program after hearing Emma speak at their assembly. The evening continued with more presentations, each one highlighting a different aspect of the Foundation's work. Jessica Chen discussed their corporate training program, teaching companies to recognize and respond to signs of financial abuse among employees. Dr. Winters presented research showing the impact of their early intervention programs. But the most powerful moment came when Emma and her friends unveiled their collaborative art piece, a massive mural that would be displayed in the Foundation's new youth center. It showed a city at night, with countless windows lit up in warm colors. In each window, a detailed scene played out, families sharing meals, children playing, people helping one another. "Every light represents a real story," Emma explained to the audience. "Every window shows someone who found help or learned to help others. We made it big, because the more stories we hear, the bigger our community grows." Alexander watched his daughter with pride, remembering the frightened child who had hidden under her bed just a year ago. Now she stood tall, her voice clear and confident as she pointed out different sections of the mural. "And these empty windows," she said, indicating several dark spaces, "are for the stories we haven't heard yet, because we know there are still people out there who need to know they're not alone." The presentation ended with a surprise, a video compilation of messages from people around the country who had been inspired to start their own support initiatives after learning about the Foundation's work. Teachers, counselors, business, leaders and community organizers shared how they were adapting the Foundation's programs to serve their own communities. As the applause died down, Caroline rejoined Alexander at their table. "Did you ever imagine," she asked softly, "that answering that phone call would lead to all this?" Alexander looked around the room, at Emma and her friends, showing visitors their artwork, at Sarah and Rebecca planning their next community outreach event, at Margaret Wellington quietly counseling a nervous mother who had just joined their program. "No," he admitted. "I thought I was just solving a problem. I never realized I was becoming part of a solution." The winter sun cast long shadows across Emma's new art studio, a converted sunroom in their Boston home, where she held weekly sessions for the Lightkeepers Project. Today, she was working with a new group of children, teaching them her special technique for adding hints of light to dark drawings. "Sometimes," she explained, carefully demonstrating with a golden marker, "you have to look really hard to find the light. But it's always there, waiting to grow bigger." Alexander paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. A year and a half had passed since that desperate phone call, and the changes were profound. Emma had blossomed from a frightened victim into a confident young healer, using her art to help other children find their voices. Caroline entered through the garden door, carrying hot chocolate for the children. She had just returned from a speaking engagement at a national conference on domestic abuse prevention, where she had presented the Foundation's innovative approach to combining financial education with emotional support. "Look who I found in the garden," she announced, as Sarah's children tumbled in behind her, followed by their mother. Sarah had recently been appointed as the Foundation's Community Outreach Coordinator, her natural ability to connect with struggling families making her perfect for the role. "Just in time," Emma called out. "We're making light maps today." The concept of light maps had been Emma's invention, drawings that showed paths from dark situations to brighter futures. Each child would create their own, marking the steps that had helped them feel safer and stronger. "I got a call from the education department today," Caroline told Alexander quietly as they watched the children work. They want to pilot our program in schools across the state, starting with the art therapy component, then expanding to include the financial literacy modules we developed. Alexander nodded, unsurprised. The Foundation's approach had proven remarkably effective, particularly in reaching children and families who might otherwise slip through the cracks of traditional support systems. The corporate initiative is expanding too, he added. 3 more major companies have signed on to implement our financial abuse recognition training. Janet's organizing a team to handle the rollout. Their conversation was interrupted by excited voices from the studio. One of the new children, a quiet girl named Lily, had just completed her first light map. Emma was showing the group how the golden lines Lily had drawn created paths between the dark spaces, connecting moments of hope. "See?" Emma pointed out. "Lily put a light right here where she told her teacher she was worried, and another one here where she and her mum found our foundation. Each light makes the next one easier to find." The other children gathered around, adding their own insights. Alexander recognized the therapeutic value in their innocent observations, each child validating the other's experiences, building a shared understanding of resilience. Sarah joined them at the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I remember Emma's first light map," she said softly. "She showed it to my daughter at the cafe that day. It gave us the courage to reach out for help." Through the studio window, they could see Margaret Wellington arriving for her weekly mentoring session. She had become an invaluable part of their prevention program, her insight into the generational patterns of financial abuse helping them identify and address root causes. "Did you see the latest impact report?" Caroline asked. "The ripple effect continues to grow. For every family we help directly, they help an average of 3 more. The network just keeps expanding." Alexander watched as Emma welcomed Margaret into the studio, proudly showing off the day's artwork. His daughter's journey from victim to healer had inspired countless others to find their own paths to recovery and purpose. "We're not just helping people escape bad situations anymore," he realized aloud. "We're changing how communities respond to abuse, how institutions recognize it, how society talks about it." "And it all started with a phone call," Caroline said, squeezing his arm gently. "One moment of choosing to really listen instead of just throwing money at the problem." In the studio, Emma was explaining to Margaret how light maps could be adapted for adult support groups. The older woman listened intently, her butterfly necklace catching the winter sunlight as she bent to examine the children's artwork. "Next week," Emma was saying, "we're going to start the Growing Light project. Everyone gets to plant a seed and draw its journey from underground to sunshine. Because healing is like that. It starts in the dark, but it always grows toward the light." Alexander smiled at the wisdom in his daughter's words. They had all been seeds in the dark once, struggling to find their way toward brightness. Now they were helping others make the same journey, creating paths of light where once there had been only shadows. Spring brought new beginnings to the Reynolds Family Protection Foundation. The organization had grown beyond anyone's expectations, with branches opening in cities across the country. But for Alexander, the most significant changes were the small personal ones he witnessed every day. Today, he sat in the Foundation's original Boston office, conducting a very special interview. Across from him sat a young woman named Rachel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes bright with determination. "I know I might seem underqualified," Rachel was saying, "but I understand these families in a way that someone with just professional training might not. 10 years ago, I was that scared little girl watching my mother struggle. Now I want to be the person I wished we'd had back then." Alexander studied Rachel's resume. While she lacked traditional credentials, her experience running a community support group in her neighborhood had produced impressive results. More importantly, she possessed the empathy and insight that the Foundation valued above all else. "Tell me about your Light Map program," he said, referencing a project mentioned in her application. Rachel's face lit up. "I read about Emma's Light Keepers project in a magazine article. It inspired me to start something similar in my community center. We work with children to create maps of their support networks, marking safe spaces, trusted adults, and moments of hope. It helps them visualize their path to safety. A knock at the door interrupted them. Emma poked her head in, now a poised 12-year-old whose artwork had become the foundation's signature imagery. "Sorry, Dad, but Mrs. Martinez is here with that family from Springfield. They need emergency accommodation." Alexander nodded, but before he could respond, Rachel spoke up. "I know a safe house network in Springfield. They work specifically with families dealing with financial abuse. I can make some calls if you'd like." The way she immediately shifted into problem-solving mode, drawing on her community connections, told Alexander everything he needed to know. "Actually, Emma, why don't you show Rachel how we handle emergency cases? She's going to be our new community outreach coordinator." Rachel's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with tears. "Really? But I haven't even finished the interview." "You just did," Alexander smiled. "You showed me exactly what we need, someone who combines personal understanding with practical action." As Emma led Rachel out to meet Mrs. Martinez, Caroline entered the office. She had just returned from overseeing the opening of their newest branch in Chicago, where Sarah had been appointed director. "I see you hired Rachel," she said, noting the completed paperwork on his desk. Her application letter was remarkable. The way she turned her own experience into a mission to help others, it reminded me of us. Alexander nodded, remembering how their own journey had started. "Did you see the statistics Janet compiled? Over 5,000 families helped directly in the past year. But the indirect impact, the ripple effect through communities, schools, workplaces, it's exponential," Caroline agreed. "Every person we help becomes a potential helper themselves. Like Rachel, she didn't wait for someone to solve her community's problems. She saw a need and created a solution." Through the window, they could see Emma showing Rachel around the office. The young woman was already engaged in helping Mrs. Martinez coordinate resources for the Springfield family, her previous nervousness replaced by confident efficiency. "Remember when we thought success meant profit margins and market share?" Alexander mused. "Now I measure it in moments like this, watching someone move from survivor to advocate." Caroline perched on the edge of his desk, a habit that would have seemed unprofessional in their previous corporate lives, but felt natural in this space of healing and hope. "Speaking of advocates, did you see Emma's latest project proposal?" She handed him a carefully prepared presentation folder. Inside, Emma had outlined a plan for a youth advisory board, a formal way to incorporate young voices into the foundation's decision-making process. "She wants to ensure we never lose sight of the children's perspective," Caroline explained. "She remembers how it felt to be voiceless, and she's determined to prevent other children from experiencing that." The proposal was thorough, showing the same attention to detail that had once characterized Alexander's business plans. But where his focus had been on financial projections, Emma's centered on emotional impact and personal growth. "I've already received calls from 3 other organizations wanting to implement similar youth boards," Caroline continued. Emma's influence reaches far beyond her artwork now. They watched as their daughter led Rachel and Mrs. Martinez to the new family crisis center they had built adjacent to the main office. The center had been Emma's idea, a warm, welcoming space where families could find immediate safety and support. 10 years ago, Alexander said softly, "I thought I understood what it meant to be successful. I had the mansion, the company, the reputation, but I was measuring all the wrong things." Caroline touched his hand gently. "We all were. But that's the beauty of what we've created here. We're teaching people to measure wealth in trust rebuilt, in confidence restored, in lives transformed." Through the window, they could see Rachel kneeling to talk to a small girl who had arrived with the Springfield family. The child was clutching a worn backpack, her posture painfully familiar to anyone who had worked with trauma survivors. But as Rachel spoke, the girl's shoulders gradually relaxed and she even managed a small smile. The garden behind the Foundation's youth center bloomed with spring flowers, their colors echoing the bright murals that covered the building's walls. Emma sat cross-legged on a bench, surrounded by her original Lightkeepers project team, now expanded to include Rachel's group from Springfield and several other young advocates. "The youth board meets next week," Emma was explaining, her notebook filled with ideas and sketches. We need to make sure every child who comes to the foundation feels heard, just like we wish we had been. Maya, who had grown into a confident teenager, pointed to one of Emma's drawings. What about this idea? Having teen mentors for the younger kids, someone who's been through what they're going through? The other children nodded enthusiastically. They had all experienced the power of connecting with others who understood their struggles. Emma's art therapy sessions had evolved into a comprehensive peer support program, with older children helping guide younger ones through their healing journeys. Inside the center, Alexander and Caroline hosted a different kind of meeting. Representatives from major financial institutions had gathered to learn about the Foundation's early warning system for detecting financial abuse. The signs are often subtle, Caroline explained, showing slides of transaction patterns they had identified. Sudden changes in spending habits, unusual account restrictions, the gradual isolation of financial resources. Our system helps banks recognize these patterns before the situation becomes critical. Janet, who had developed much of the detection software, added, "We've already prevented hundreds of cases from escalating. When banks see these warning signs, they can now connect customers with resources and support, rather than just watching the situation deteriorate." Alexander watched with pride as his ex-wife commanded the attention of some of the country's top financial executives. Caroline had transformed her own painful experience into expertise that was changing how institutions approached customer protection. The presentation was interrupted by sounds of laughter from the garden. The children had moved to the art tables, where they were teaching new arrivals how to create light maps. Through the window, Alexander could see Rachel working with a particularly withdrawn child, using Emma's techniques to help him express his feelings through color and shape. "This is why the program works," Caroline told the bankers, gesturing to the scene outside. "We don't just offer financial solutions or emotional support. We create communities where healing can happen naturally, where people can rebuild their lives with dignity." One of the executives, a woman who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "I've visited several of your branches now, and what strikes me most is the ripple effect. Every person you help becomes an agent of change in their own community." "Exactly," Alexander agreed. "Like Rachel out there. She came to us as a job applicant, but she had already created her own support network based on our model. Now she's helping us expand our youth programs in ways we hadn't even considered." The meeting concluded with commitments from every bank to implement the Foundation's detection system and support services. As the executives filed out, many paused to watch the children's art session in the garden, their expressions softening at the sight of young survivors, helping newcomers find their voice through art. Sarah arrived with a new family, a mother and 2 children who had been referred by one of the Foundation's community partners. Alexander watched as Emma and her friends immediately welcomed the children into their circle, offering art supplies and gentle encouragement. "It's amazing," Sarah said, joining Alexander and Caroline by the window. "Remember when Emma could barely speak to strangers? Now look at her. She's created a whole movement of young healers." The mother Sarah had brought in was speaking with Rachel, her tense posture gradually relaxing as she learned about the Foundation's programs. Her children, initially clinging to her sides, had cautiously joined the art session, drawn in by the warm welcome from Emma's group. "That's the real success," Caroline said softly. "Not the numbers or the programs or the corporate partnerships. It's these moments, watching people realize they're not alone, seeing them discover their own strength." Alexander nodded, remembering the desperate father he had been, thinking money alone could solve every problem. "We're not just breaking cycles of abuse," he realized. "We're creating cycles of healing." Outside, Emma was showing the new children how to add touches of gold to their drawings, teaching them her signature technique for finding light in darkness. The spring breeze carried their voices through the open window, young survivors sharing stories of hope, offering each other the understanding and support they had once desperately needed themselves. The Foundation had become more than a safety net. It was a bridge, connecting past pain to future purpose, linking those who needed help with those who could provide it, joining individual healing to community transformation, and at its heart were the children like Emma, who had found their own light and now helped others find theirs. 2 years to the day after that life-changing phone call, Alexander stood in the grand hall of the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The space had been transformed for a special exhibition, Finding Light, the Art of Healing Through Children's Eyes. Emma's Lightkeepers project had grown into a nationwide movement, and now its impact was being celebrated in one of the city's most prestigious venues. Hundreds of drawings lined the walls, each telling a story of transformation. Emma's original works formed the centerpiece of the exhibition, showing her journey from those first tentative sketches of fear to her recent vibrant pieces about community and hope. Around them, artwork from children across the country demonstrated how her vision had inspired others to find their own artistic voice. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" Caroline appeared beside him, elegant in a simple black dress. Seeing all these stories together, understanding how many lives have been touched. Before Alexander could respond, a small commotion near the entrance caught their attention. A group of children was arriving, the newest members of the Lightkeepers project, accompanied by Rachel and Sarah. Among them was Lily, the quiet girl who had created her first light map in Emma's studio months ago. Now she was one of their most enthusiastic young mentors. "Dad, Mom," Emma called, hurrying over. She had been giving a tour to some museum trustees, explaining the significance behind different pieces. At 12, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made her seem older, though her eyes still held that special spark of childhood wisdom. "The curator wants to make this a traveling exhibition," she announced excitedly. "They think it could help start Lightkeepers projects in other cities, even other countries." Alexander watched as visitors moved through the exhibition, pausing to read the stories behind each piece. Many were wiping away tears. Others were nodding in recognition of experiences they had shared. The artwork spoke a universal language of pain and healing, fear and hope. Dr. Winters joined them, her clinical perspective adding depth to their observations. "The therapeutic value of this project has exceeded all expectations," she said. "We're seeing children process trauma in ways that traditional therapy alone couldn't achieve. They're not just healing themselves, they're creating pathways for others to heal." A large screen at one end of the hall played interviews with children and families who had been helped by the foundation. Their stories wove together, creating a tapestry of transformation. One mother described how her daughter's participation in the Lightkeepers project had given her the courage to leave an abusive situation. A teenage boy explained how learning to express his feelings through art had helped him understand his family's journey to safety. Margaret Wellington stood before a wall of butterflies, drawings created by children to represent their moments of transformation. Her own butterfly necklace caught the light as she spoke softly with a group of mothers, sharing her perspective on breaking generational cycles of abuse. "Your foundation's approach is revolutionary," a museum trustee told Alexander. "Combining financial protection with emotional healing, using art as a bridge between trauma and recovery, it's changing how we understand the impact of financial abuse on families." But Alexander's attention was drawn to a quiet corner where Emma sat with a newly arrived family. Their daughter, clutching a worn backpack much like Emma had once carried, was slowly beginning to respond to Emma's gentle encouragement to try drawing. The scene crystallized everything the foundation had become, a place where survivors became healers, where personal pain transformed into collective strength. Janet approached with a tablet displaying the latest statistics. The foundation's impact had grown exponentially. Thousands of families directly helped, tens of thousands reached through community programs, hundreds of thousands touched by their educational initiatives. But the numbers seemed less important now than the individual moments of connection and healing happening throughout the hall. "Look," Caroline whispered, pointing to Emma's newest piece, a massive canvas that dominated one wall. It showed a city at night, but unlike her early drawings of dark windows and hidden fears, this one blazed with light. Each illuminated window revealed a scene of hope. Families sharing meals, children playing, communities coming together. And, between the windows, golden lines connected everyone, creating a network of support and understanding. That's us, Emma explained, joining them. All of us. Every light is someone who found help or learned to help others. And the lines show how we're all connected now, how each person's healing helps light the way for someone else. As evening fell, the museum's lights created a soft glow around the artwork. Visitors continued to arrive. Social workers, teachers, community leaders, all drawn by the power of children's voices speaking truth through art. Each person who walked through the exhibition became part of the story, carrying its message of hope and transformation back to their own communities. Alexander stood with his arm around Emma's shoulders, watching as she explained her artistic process to a group of interested observers. His daughter had taken her darkest moment and transformed it into a movement that brought light to countless others. In doing so, she had taught him the true meaning of legacy, not wealth or power, but the ability to turn pain into purpose, fear into hope, darkness into light. The sunset painted Boston's skyline in shades of gold as Alexander, Caroline, and Emma walked home from the museum. The exhibition's success had exceeded all expectations, but it was the quiet moments of connection that meant the most. Watching survivors find hope in children's artwork, seeing families recognize their own stories in the displayed pieces. Did you see how many people signed up to start Lightkeepers projects in their communities? Emma asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Rachel says we'll need to create training programs for all the new mentors. Caroline smiled, remembering the frightened little girl who had once hidden under her bed. You've started something beautiful, sweetheart, something that will keep growing long after today. They stopped at their favorite cafe, the same one where they had once helped Sarah and her children. Now it was a regular meeting spot for foundation families, a safe space where healing could happen over shared cookies and gentle conversations. I never thought answering that phone call would lead to all this, Alexander mused, watching Emma arrange her cookie plate in her characteristic careful way. I thought I understood what it meant to help people. I thought money was enough. But it wasn't about the money, was it, Daddy? Emma said, offering him a piece of her cookie, a gesture that always reminded him of how far they'd come. It was about being there, about listening, about helping people find their light again. Through the cafe window, they could see the Foundation's youth center down the street, its walls covered in murals created by Lightkeepers project participants. The building stood as a testament to transformation, not just of the families it helped, but of everyone involved in its mission. The bank called today, Caroline mentioned, stirring her tea. Their implementation of our early warning system has already identified over 100 potential cases of financial abuse. They're connecting those families with resources before the situation becomes critical. Alexander nodded, remembering how isolated they had once felt. Prevention is key, breaking the cycle before it takes hold. Like planting seeds, Emma added, referencing her latest art therapy project. You have to nurture them and give them time to grow. As they talked, other cafe patrons stopped by their table. A mother whose daughter had just joined the Lightkeepers project, a teacher implementing their programs in her school, a businessman interested in bringing their corporate training to his company. Each conversation reinforced how their personal story had become part of a larger narrative of change. You know what I love most? Emma said as they finally headed home. When new kids come to the center scared like I was, but then they see all the artwork and realize they're not alone, that's when they start to find their own light. The Foundation's main office was dark now, but Alexander knew it would be bustling with activity tomorrow. Rachel would be training new community outreach coordinators, Sarah would be organizing support group sessions, and Margaret would be counseling families ready to break free from generational patterns of abuse. And in Emma's studio, children would continue to create their light maps, each one marking a path from darkness to hope, from isolation to community, from fear to strength. We're building bridges, Caroline said softly, echoing a phrase that had become the Foundation's unofficial motto. Between past and future, between pain and healing, between those who need help and those who can provide it. As they reached their home, Emma paused to look at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. Every light has a story, she said, quoting from her exhibition speech. "And when we share our light with others, it grows stronger." Alexander wrapped his arms around his daughter and ex-wife, feeling the strength of their rebuilt bonds. They had transformed their own story of fear and separation into one of hope and connection, creating ripples that continued to touch lives far beyond their own. The foundation would continue to grow, reaching more families, inspiring more communities, breaking more cycles of abuse. But its heart would always be in these moments of personal transformation, in the child finding their voice through art, in the parent learning to trust again, in the survivor becoming a mentor. "Ready for tomorrow?" Caroline asked Emma as they entered their home. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with purpose. There's always more light to share. And in that simple statement lay the true measure of their success.